The hallway at Walter Reed Military Medical Center was silent that Tuesday morning, except for the rhythmic sound of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's boots against the linoleum floor. Her eyes burned with fatigue after a 16-hour shift, but she knew her day was far from over. "Dr. Mitchell," head nurse Jennifer's voice broke the silence. "We need you in the psychiatric ward. It's urgent." Sarah felt her stomach clench. The psychiatric ward meant only one thing: another veteran battling invisible demons, wounds no scalpel could reach. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, already following Jennifer through the labyrinthine hospital corridors. "Sergeant Jake Morrison, Navy SEAL, sniper, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq." Jennifer read from her tablet as she walked briskly. "Severe PTSD, clinical depression, suicidal behavior. 20 different doctors have tried to treat him in the last 18 months. None have made any real progress." Sarah paused momentarily. 20 doctors. That was practically impossible. Even the most difficult cases usually responded to some treatment after 3 or 4 attempts with different professionals. "Why so many?" she asked. Jennifer hesitated before answering. "He doesn't talk. To anyone. Absolutely no one. He just sits there staring at the wall. He refuses medication, therapy, everything. The previous doctor said it's like trying to walk through a concrete wall." "And why do you think I'll be different?" "Honestly, we don't think so." Jennifer's brutal honesty was one of her most striking characteristics. "But you're the only one left. If you can't reach him, well, he's run out of options." Sarah nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words. When a patient's options ran out in the military healthcare system, it usually meant only one thing: transfer to a long-term care facility where they would essentially be forgotten, medicated until unconscious, and left to languish. They stopped in front of a heavy door with a small, reinforced glass window. Jennifer unlocked it with her security card. "Good luck, doctor. You're going to need it." Sarah took a deep breath and went into the room. The first thing that struck her was the silence. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a dense, almost palpable silence, as if the very air were heavy with unspoken pain. The room was Spartan: a bed, a chair, a small table. No personal decorations, no photos, nothing to indicate that a real human being inhabited that space. And then she saw him. Jake Morrison sat in the chair by the window, but he wasn't looking out the window. His eyes, which must have once been vibrant blue, now seemed dull, fixed on some undefined point on the white wall in front of him. He was tall, probably 6 feet 3 inches, with broad shoulders that suggested years of intense physical training. But there was something broken in his posture, as if an invisible weight pressed his shoulders down. His tattooed arms rested motionless on his legs. Sarah noticed scars, many scars. Some were surgical, clean and precise. Others were jagged, probably from shrapnel or bomb fragments. "Sergeant Morrison?" Sarah spoke softly, approaching slowly. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a psychiatrist here at Walter Reed." No response, not even a twitch in his eyes. Sarah pulled up another chair and sat down, not directly across from him. That would be too confrontational, but at a 45-degree angle, respecting his personal space. "I know. You've heard this from many people before me," she continued, keeping her voice calm and non-threatening. "I know you've had 20 different doctors try to help you. I imagine you're tired of empty words and promises that lead nowhere." Silence. Only the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway. Sarah observed him carefully. His muscles were tense, like a bowstring ready to shoot. His hands, though appearing relaxed, had slightly curved fingers, a fighting stance she recognized. Even in his current state, he was ready to fight or flee at any moment. "I'm not going to promise I can fix you," Sarah said honestly. "I'm not going to say I have all the answers, but I can promise I'll listen, really, without judgment, without a hidden agenda. Nothing." The concrete wall that Jennifer had mentioned was very real. Sarah spent the next hour sitting there, speaking occasionally, but mostly just being present. She talked about the weather, about the hospital gardens, about trivial things that didn't require an answer. She didn't ask intrusive questions about his time in service, about his traumas, about what brought him there. Finally, when the hour was up, she stood up. "I'll be back tomorrow, Sergeant Morrison. Same time. You don't need to speak. You don't need to do anything, but I'll be here." She was almost at the door when she heard, or thought she heard, the faintest sigh behind her. When she turned around, he was still in the same position, staring at the same wall. The days turned into weeks. Sarah returned every morning, sat in the same chair, and spoke softly with Jake Morrison. Sometimes she shared stories of other patients, without identifying them, of course. Sometimes she read poetry. Other times she simply remained in compassionate silence. The hospital staff began to look at her with pity, some with irritation. She was wasting valuable time on a lost cause when there were other patients who really needed help. "Sarah, you need to accept that some cannot be saved," said Dr. Hendricks, head of the psychiatry department, during a meeting. "Morrison is beyond our reach. We've already invested too many resources in him." "One more week," Sarah pleaded. "Give me one more week." Hendricks sighed heavily. "1 week. After that, we'll need to transfer him to long-term care." Sarah knew what that meant. Jake would be heavily medicated and essentially stored away, not treated. The idea made her nauseous. That night, Sarah did something she didn't normally. She took the work home. She spread Jake's files out on her dining room table after removing all identifiable information, maintaining professional ethics, and began studying every detail of his military life. Jake Morrison enlisted in the Navy at 18. He went through BUDS training, the infamous program that transforms men into SEALs, with flying colors. He was assigned to SEAL Team 5 and quickly became one of the Special Forces' best snipers. His evaluations were impeccable. Calm, under extreme pressure, exceptional ability to make decisions under fire, saves lives through surgical precision in combat situations. But then Sarah found something interesting. Buried among the notes from her last mission in Afghanistan was a reference to an incident. Details were scarce. Most were redacted for national security reasons. But there was a name: Operation Broken Arrow. Sarah searched, but couldn't find anything about that specific operation. It was classified, obviously. But something about that mission had broken Jake Morrison. On the 19th day of her silent sessions, Sarah decided to try a different approach. "Sergeant Morrison," she began, her voice firmer than in previous days, "I need to tell you something about myself, something that few people know." She saw, or thought she saw, the slightest twitch in his eyes. Not much, but something. "Before becoming a psychiatrist, I was a combat paramedic. I served 3 years in the army, 2 tours in Iraq." Sarah never shared this with patients. It was a rule of hers to maintain professional boundaries, but something about Jake made her break that rule. "My radio call sign was Angel 6 because I was the 6th medic in my unit and, well, the soldiers thought I was some kind of angel when I showed up under fire to treat them." She chuckled softly at the irony. "I wasn't an angel. I was just a scared girl from Ohio trying to keep people alive." Sarah paused, memories flooding back. "I had a mission that changed everything. An ambush in Fallujah. My best friend, a soldier named Marcus, was hit. I did everything right, all the training, all the protocol. But he died in my arms, and I couldn't save him." Her voice softened. "For months after that, I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't process it. I felt like a fraud wearing the uniform. It was only when someone sat down with me, really sat down with me, without judgment, without rushing, that I was able to begin to dismantle that wall I had built." Sarah looked directly at Jake for the first time in 19 days. "So I understand, Sergeant Morrison. Not in the same way you do. Every trauma is unique. But I understand what it's like to carry something so heavy that it seems impossible to put into words." Silence stretched between them, but it was different now, less hostile, more connected. "My call sign was Shadow 2, Jake said suddenly, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Second sniper position. Shadow because that's what I was. A shadow. Invisible until I wasn't anymore. Sarah felt her heart race, but she maintained a calm and neutral expression. Shadow 2, she repeated softly. May I ask about your work as Shadow 2? Jake closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, there were unshed tears pooled there. I killed people, Angel 6. Many people, and they said I was good at it. The best, actually. His voice was heavy with self-loathing. 117 confirmed. 117 human lives ended because my finger pulled a trigger. Insurgents, Sarah said calmly. Terrorists. People who were trying to kill their teammates, innocent civilians. Does it even matter? Jake whispered. In the end, it's still 117 souls, 117 people who had mothers, maybe children, stories I'll never know, and I erased them. And how many lives did you save with those shots? Sarah asked. How many of your siblings came home because you were in the sniper position? Jake shook his head violently. You don't understand. The last mission. His voice faltered. Sarah waited, giving him space. Operation Broken Arrow, Jake finally said, the words coming out like shards of glass. It was a rescue mission. 3 American soldiers captured by insurgents. Intelligence said they would be executed within 24 hours. Our team was sent to get them out. He stopped, his hands now trembling. Sarah noticed, but didn't. Comment. I was in an elevated position. I had a view of the entire complex. I saw our targets, 6 armed insurgents. I had clear shots on all of them. I started eliminating them one by one. 5 went down perfectly. Jake swallowed hard, tears finally streaming down his face. The 6th, I fired. But at that exact moment, a child, a girl, she couldn't have been more than 8 years old, ran in front of him. She was looking for her doll, just a child looking for her toy in the middle of a war zone. The horror of the story hit Sarah like a freight train. Jake, the bullet passed through her before hitting its target, he continued, his voice now monotonous, disconnected, as if he were recounting something that happened to someone else. I killed an innocent child, Angel 6, a child, and we rescued our soldiers. The mission was a success. I received a medal, but I killed a child. Sarah shifted from her chair and knelt in front of Jake, not touching him, but present. Listen to me, Shadow 2. You didn't aim at that child. You didn't know she was there. It was a tragedy, a terrible tragedy, but it wasn't murder. It was the war, the horrible, chaotic, impossible war that took her life. I pulled the trigger. You were doing your job, saving American lives, and taking an innocent life in the process. And you think carrying this guilt, destroying yourself, brings her back? Sarah asked gently. Do you think your death, because that's what's happening here, a slow death, honors her memory? Jake finally looked at Sarah, really looked at her for the first time. His blue eyes were red and filled with pain. So what do I do? How do I live with this? You don't get over it, Sarah said honestly. You never get over it, but you learn to carry on, and you find ways to honor that life by giving meaning to your own. You can choose to let it destroy you, or you can choose to let it transform you into someone who fights so that fewer children grow up in war zones. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Jake opened the floodgates and years of trauma came pouring in. Sarah listened to it all, every mission, every death, every moment of terror and triumph. She kept her promises. No judgment, no agenda, just genuine listening. They discovered that they had both served in nearby areas in Iraq, although they had never crossed paths. They shared memories of the suffocating heat, the sand getting into everything, the sound of explosions that still woke them at night. Do you still have nightmares? Jake asked during a session. Sometimes, Sarah admitted. Not as often as before, but yes, they never completely disappear. How do you deal with them? Therapy? Exercise? Writing? Sarah smiled. And admitting that I'm not superhuman, that it's okay not to be okay sometimes. Jake considered this. The SEALs don't train us to admit weakness. Asking for help isn't weakness, Shadow 2. It's the strongest thing you've ever done." Slowly, very slowly, Jake began to improve. He accepted medication for anxiety and depression. He started participating in group therapy with other veterans. He even started exercising again. Nothing close to the intensity of his days as a SEAL, but enough to make his body feel useful again. But the real turning point came 6 weeks after their first meeting. Sarah entered the session room and found Jake not in his usual chair, but standing near the window, actually looking out for the first time. "There's a garden down there," he said without turning around. "I'd never noticed it before." "It's beautiful," Sarah agreed, joining him at the window. "Hospital volunteers maintain it." "I want to do something like that," Jake said suddenly. "When I get out of here, I want to create something, not destroy. I want to use my hands to grow things, not to—" "Don't finish sentences," Sarah added softly. Jake turned to her. "Thank you, Angel 6, for not giving up on me when everyone else did. You were never a lost cause, Shadow 2. You just needed someone willing to wait until you were ready." 3 months later, Jake Morrison was released from intensive care. He would continue with outpatient therapy, but no longer needed 24-hour supervision. On the day of his discharge, he sought out Sarah. "I found out," he said, handing her a piece of paper with an address. The girl's name, where her family is now. They managed to flee to Turkey as refugees. Sarah looked at the paper, then at Jake. "And I'm going to write to them, through a translator. Tell the truth. I don't expect forgiveness, but they deserve to know that someone carries on her memory, that she wasn't just a statistic." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "That's incredibly brave." "I learned from the best," Jake said, offering a small smile, the first one Sarah had ever seen from him. "What are you going to do now?" "I started a horticulture program. There's an organization that helps veterans start small farms. I'm going to grow vegetables. Simple things," he paused. "And I'm going to work with other veterans, especially snipers, because I understand the specific weight they carry." "Shadow 2, helping other shadows find the light," Sarah said softly. "Something like this." Jake held out his hand. "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for seeing me when I was invisible." Sarah squeezed his hand firmly. "It was always visible, Jake. You just needed someone looking in the right place." Sarah was in her office when a box was delivered. Inside were fresh vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, pumpkin, and a card. "Angel 6, second harvest of the season. I thought you'd like to know that the plants are growing well, just like me. I also thought that I would like to know that I received a letter from Amira's, that was her name, family. It took 18 months, but they replied. It wasn't forgiveness. I don't know if I can be forgiven, but it was recognition. The mother said it was important for her to know that someone cared, that her daughter hadn't been forgotten. I started a support group for veteran snipers, 8 men so far. We call it shadow support because we understand what it's like to live in the shadows of what we've done. 2 of them were on the path I was on, but they're finding their way back just like I did. None of this would have been possible if you hadn't used your call sign that day. Shadow 2 was lost, but Angel 6 found me. Always grateful, Jake Morrison. Sarah smiled, through the tears streaming down her face. She hung the card on her bulletin board, a reminder that sometimes the most impossible cases just need someone willing to wait, listen, and believe. 20 doctors had tried and failed. But when she spoke her call sign, Angel 6, and Jake responded with his, Shadow 2, they found a common language, a language of survival, trauma, and ultimately, hope. Because in the end, it wasn't medical credentials or sophisticated therapeutic techniques that reached him. It was human connection. It was a veteran who understood the weight of combat, speaking to another who carried a different but equally heavy burden. It was Angel 6 reminding Shadow 2 that even in the deepest shadows, light can still find a way. The story of Jake Morrison and Dr. Sarah Mitchell illustrates a fundamental truth about trauma and healing. Sometimes professional credentials aren't enough. Sometimes a genuine human connection is needed, someone who understands not just theoretically but viscerally what it means to bear the weight of the struggle. The 20 doctors who tried before Sarah were not incompetent. They were qualified, experienced, dedicated professionals, but none of them had been suitable. None understood the specific language of combat trauma, the particular guilt that comes from taking lives to save lives, the impossible weight of split-second decisions that reverberate throughout a lifetime. When Sarah said, Angel 6, her call sign from when, she was a combat medic. She wasn't just sharing information, she was opening a door. She was saying, I've been there, not in the same place as you, but close enough to understand the geography of your pain. And when Jake responded with Shadow 2, he wasn't just giving a radio call sign, he was accepting the invitation. He was saying, maybe you can understand, maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. Jake's journey back wasn't quick or easy. 2 years later, he still carried the weight of Amira, the girl who accidentally died from his bullet. He always would, but he learned to transform that weight into purpose, cultivating life through horticulture, helping other veterans find their own way back through shadow support. The story also highlights a frequently ignored reality about military snipers. Society celebrates them in films and books, turning their skills into entertainment, but it rarely considers the psychological cost of being trained to kill with surgical precision, of carrying the exact record of how many lives you've ended, of living with the responsibility of every decision to pull the trigger. For Jake, the number was 117 until the mission that broke him. For other snipers, the number is different, but the weight is the same. And for many, that weight becomes unbearable without adequate support, without someone who understands the specific nature of their trauma. The Shadow Support program that Jake created represents a crucial approach to veteran care, peer support based on shared experience. Mental health professionals are essential, but there is something profoundly therapeutic about talking to someone who has literally been in the same trenches, who understands without needing explanation. The letter Jake eventually received from Amira's family also represents an important aspect of his healing process. It wasn't forgiveness. Some acts are too great for simple forgiveness, but it was recognition. Amira's mother acknowledged. Jake carried the memory of her daughter, that he hadn't forgotten her or dismissed her as collateral damage. For Jake, this meant that her life had meaning, that her death wasn't in vain, even though it was tragic. Sarah, for her part, learned something about her own practice. She had built professional walls, keeping her military experience separate from her work as a psychiatrist. She believed that sharing too much of herself with patients would create boundary issues. But with Jake, she discovered that sometimes appropriate vulnerability, sharing relevant experience at the right time, can be the key that unlocks long-closed doors. This doesn't mean that all therapists should share their personal stories with all patients, but it does mean recognizing that authentic human connection sometimes requires setting aside professional armor, at least momentarily, and saying, I'm human too, I've struggled too, and you're not alone. Years after that first meeting, Sarah continued, treating veterans with PTSD. But she brought something new to each session, the reminder that sometimes the most impossible cases are not impossible at all. They just need the right person at the right time, willing to wait the necessary amount of time. Jake Morrison wasn't cured. Deep trauma doesn't work that way, but he found a way to live with his trauma, to transform it into something meaningful. His hands, which once held sniper rifles to take lives, now held garden tools to cultivate life. His mind, which once calculated ballistic trajectories and wind compensation, now planned garden layouts and planting schedules. And her heart, which had once been closed and hardened by guilt, slowly learned to open again, to possibility, to connection, to hope. The story of Angel 6 and Shadow 2 reminds us that healing isn't about erasing the past or forgetting what was lost. It's about finding ways to carry our burdens without being crushed by them. It's about transforming pain into purpose, guilt into responsibility, and darkness into light. Not denying the shadows, but learning to navigate through them. 20 doctors failed not because they were incompetent, but because sometimes the right person hadn't yet arrived. Sometimes healing awaits the precise moment when two souls who understand the language of trauma meet and say, "I see you, I understand," and together we can find a way forward. And at that moment, in the simple words of shared radio call signs, Angel 6 and Shadow 2, a journey began back from the shadows toward the light, a journey that continues one day at a time, one plant cultivated at a time, one veteran life helped at a time. Because in the end, that's what it means to serve, to keep fighting, not with weapons, but with compassion, connection, and the relentless refusal to give up on our brothers and sisters, no matter how deep the shadows in which they have lost themselves. Shadow 2 has found his way back, and now he dedicates his life to ensuring that other shadows can find theirs too. This is the true story of heroism, not the glory of the battlefield, but the quiet courage of healing, the brutal strength needed to confront our inner demons, and the extraordinary humanity needed to reach out and help others do the same. From Angel 6 to Shadow 2, and from Shadow 2 to countless others who still fight, the message is clear. You are not alone. You are not beyond help. You are not defined by your worst moments. And there is always a way back. Sometimes you just need someone who speaks your language, understands your shadows, and is willing to walk alongside you as you find your own light. To fully understand Jake Morrison's journey, it's important to understand the specific world of military snipers and the unique type of psychological trauma they often experience. Sniper guns, a unique perspective on combat. Military snipers occupy a unique position in the armed forces. While most soldiers face the enemy in close or medium combat, with adrenaline pumping and chaos all around, snipers operate fundamentally differently. They observe their targets through telescopic sights, see the faces of the people they are going to kill, sometimes spending hours or days observing life patterns before receiving the order to shoot. For many snipers, this intimacy with death creates a different kind of psychological trauma. It's not the trauma of being attacked, but the trauma of being the cold and calculating executioner, of having time to think before each kill, of carrying the weight of each individual decision to take a life. Silence as a defense. Jake's reaction, absolute silence, refusal to engage with 20 different doctors, is surprisingly common. Silence serves several functions. It's control when everything seems out of control. It's protection against being overwhelmed by memories. It's self-imposed punishment. And it's despair after repeated attempts to explain to those who don't understand. Why did indicatives matter? The turning point wasn't some sophisticated psychological technique. It was Sarah saying Angel 6, her combat call sign. Radio call signs in military contexts represent identity, purpose, belonging. When Sarah shared hers, she was offering credentials that mattered to Jake in a way no medical degree ever could. Transforming death into life. Jake's choice to engage in horticulture was deeply symbolic. His hands, which had held instruments of death, now held tools of life and growth. Each seed planted was an act of creation to counterbalance past acts of destruction. Horticulture offered tangible purpose, transforming death into life, destruction into creation. Lessons for treating veterans. Patience is crucial. Sarah waited 19 days. Connection trumps credentials. The military designation opened doors that diplomas couldn't. Moral trauma requires specific approaches. Peer support is irreplaceable. Healing isn't linear. Jake still carries a mirror, but he's found ways to transform that burden into purpose. The story of Shadow 2 and Angel 6 is ultimately about the power of human connection in healing wounds that seem impossible to heal. 20 doctors failed, not because they were incompetent, but because Jake wasn't ready. And when he finally was ready, when he found someone who spoke his language and understood his world, healing became possible. This healing wasn't complete or perfect. Jake still carries a mirror with him. He still has nightmares. He still struggles some days, but he found a way to live with his trauma instead of being consumed by it. He transformed his shadows into purpose, cultivating life, helping other veterans, honoring memories through meaningful action. He learned that being Shadow 2 didn't mean being lost in darkness forever. It meant understanding the darkness deeply enough to help others find their way through it. And Sarah learned that sometimes the most powerful therapeutic act is not applying technique, but offering humanity, saying, "I also struggled, I also suffered, and together we can find a way forward." From Angel 6 to Shadow 2, and from Shadow 2 to countless other shadows struggling to find light, the message remains clear. You are not alone. You are not beyond redemption. Your shadows don't completely define you. And with patience, connection, and purpose, even the deepest wounds can begin to transform into wisdom, compassion, and strength to help others who are still struggling. This is the true lesson of Shadow 2. Not that everyone can be saved, but that everyone deserves someone willing to sit in their shadows, speak their language, and wait patiently while they find their own way back to the light. Sometimes it takes 21 attempts. Sometimes it takes a radio call sign. Sometimes it takes just one person who refuses to give up, who sees humanity where others see only a lost cause. And sometimes that's enough. The story of Shadow 2 and Angel 6 reminds us that healing isn't about erasing the past or forgetting what was lost. It's about finding ways to carry our burdens without being crushed by them. It's about transforming pain into purpose, guilt into responsibility, and darkness into light. Not denying the shadows, but learning to navigate through them. 20 doctors failed, not because they were incompetent, but because sometimes the right person hadn't yet arrived. Sometimes healing awaits the precise moment when two souls who understand the language of trauma meet and say, "I see you, I understand," and together we can find a way forward. Jake Morrison wasn't cured in the traditional sense. 2 years after that first transformative encounter, he still carries the weight of a mirror. He always will, but he has found a way to live with his trauma, to transform it into something meaningful. His hands, which once held sniper rifles to take lives, now hold garden tools to cultivate life. His experience, which once isolated him in silence and despair, now connects him to other veterans through shadow support, offering hope and understanding to those still lost in their own shadows. Sarah Mitchell also grew through this journey. She had kept her military experience separate from her professional practice, believing that strict boundaries were essential. But with Jake, she learned that sometimes appropriate vulnerability, sharing relevant experience at the right time, can be the key that unlocks long-locked doors. She didn't abandon her ethical or professional principles, but expanded her understanding of how to authentically connect with those who carry similar traumas to her own. The story also highlights an uncomfortable truth about our mental health system for veterans. Resources are limited, patience is scarce, and difficult cases are often dismissed as impossible when they require more time and effort than the system can handle. Jake was lucky. He found Sarah on the 21st try when many would have already given up completely or been transferred to long-term institutional care where they would have been essentially forgotten. How many other veterans like Jake are there? How many Shadow 2s sit silently, waiting for their Angel 6, but never find it because the system gives up on them first? This is a question that should haunt us all, especially in a nation that sends young men and women to war zones and then often fails to provide the necessary support when they return carrying unseen wounds. Jake and Sarah remind us that healing is possible, but it requires patience beyond what typical medical systems allow, authentic connection that transcends professional credentials, understanding the specific nature of combat trauma, peer support alongside professional treatment, purpose and meaning to transform pain into growth, responsibility without self-destruction, and above all, it requires the refusal to give up, even when it seems impossible, even when 20 attempts have already failed, even when everyone says there is no hope. Because in the end, as Jake and Sarah proved, there are no truly impossible cases. There are only people waiting for the right moment, the right connection, the person who will speak their language and see their humanity through the shadows. Shadow 2 has found his way back to the light, and now he dedicates his life to ensuring that other shadows can find theirs too. From Angel 6 to Shadow 2, and from Shadow 2 to countless others who still struggle. You are not alone. You are not beyond help. And there is always a way back. Sometimes you just need someone who speaks your language, understands your shadows, and is willing to walk beside you as you find your own light. This is the promise of shadow support. This is the lesson of Angel 6 and Shadow 2. And this is the hope for all veterans who still carry the invisible weight of combat. Healing is possible, connection exists, and you are never so lost in the shadows that the light cannot find you, especially when that light comes from someone who has already walked through their own darkness and emerged on the other side. The journey continues. The shadows still exist. But now there is light too, cultivated in gardens, shared in support groups, offered through outstretched hands and radio signals that connect souls through the shared language of service, sacrifice, and survival. Shadow 2 and Angel 6. 2 veterans, 2 stories, a shared path back from the shadows to the light, and proof that sometimes when 20 attempts fail, the 21st can be the one that changes everything.